and high cost of living, amongst other issues bedeviling the economy. Now, therefore, the Senate, in order for the Senate to create an amiable environment and tone for national conversation and dialogue in the country, resolves as follows. A, that the National Police Service acknowledges and apologizes for all the deaths resulting from the peaceful demonstrations. B, that all victims of police brutality related to peaceful protests between 2023 and 2024 be compensated by the government of the Republic of Kenya. C, that the National Police Service extends amnesty to all the peaceful protesters who are unlawfully detained during the peaceful protests. D, to call upon the Director of Public Prosecutions to withdraw all the cases in court involving peaceful protesters against the Finance Bill. E, that the Independent Police Oversight Authority moves with speed to investigate and recommend appropriate action against the police officers found culpable of using brutality against peaceful protesters. F, that the National Police Service submits to Parliament the revised standard operating procedures on the management of protests, demonstrations, and the use of force to contain demonstrations. And G, Parliament puts in place guidelines on actualization of Article 37 of the Constitution with respect to how citizens can enjoy the right to picket without resulting in the loss of life or property. 2, direct the following select committees of the Senate to urgently engage the relevant stakeholders, including members of public, and consider on the following issues: public debt and public finance management. The Standing Committee on Finance and Budget, in consultation with the Parliamentary Budget Office, to independently audit the national debt and present the actual status to Parliament. 2, engages the National Treasury to submit a roadmap on its strategy to reduce the public debt to not more than 55% of the gross domestic product GDP in present value terms, in compliance with Section 52C of the Public Finance Management Act. And 3, engages the National Treasury to identify and implement sustainable strategies to reduce the high cost of living. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights repeals Section 2 and 12A of the National Government Administration Laws Amendment Act that establishes chief administrative secretaries. Introduce a legislation to cap the number of principal secretaries appointed pursuant to Article 155 of the Constitution of Kenya, and establish a legal mechanism for merger of parastatals and state agencies that perform duplicate functions with a view to achieve a lean government. Security sector reforms. The Standing Committee on National Security, Defense and Foreign Affairs, 1, engages with the National Police Service on matters of security and standard operating procedures for handling demonstrations. 2, engages the government to compensate all persons whose property, both movable and immovable, were damaged or lost during the demonstrations. And 3, engages the National Police Service to fast-track insurance compensations to police officers who either lost their lives or suffered injuries as a result of the demonstrations. And 4, engages with the Directorate of Criminal Investigations to have investigations undertaken to ascertain the identity of persons, organizations, funding and coordinating the violence during the protests and demonstrations in the country. Fighting corruption. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights engages the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on matters corruption and action to be taken to scale up efforts to deal with corruption, especially in county governments. Equal opportunities for all Kenyans. The Standing Committee on National Cohesion, Equal Opportunity and Regional Integration, 1, engages the Public Service Commission and the National Cohesion and Integration Commission to audit the state of employment of the public service, including county governments, and propose strategies to adhere to meritocracy, equality, and equity of opportunities across the public service as espoused in Article 232 of the Constitution on the values and principles of public service. And 2, engages the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority to audit compliance with Section 53(6) of the Public Procurement Act and assets disposal by all public procurement entities with a view to establish a roadmap to ensure compliance of the said provisions of the Act, effective public participation and stakeholder engagement. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights puts in place mechanisms to ensure that broader concerns for citizens, especially the youth, are received, considered and taken in consideration in making decisions on public affairs. And two, puts in place mechanisms that integrate new media as a medium for public participation in legislative processes. Health sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Health to expedite and facilitate public participation in the reenactment of the Social Health Insurance Act, the Digital Health Act, the Primary Health Care Act, in compliance with the judgment of the High Court petition number E473 of 2023, and to engage with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and the Council of Governors with a view to standardize human resource policy for health workers across all counties. Education sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Education to liaise with the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders with a view to resolving the concerns raised regarding junior secondary school GSSS education, the new funding model for university education, and the acceptability of competence-based curriculum, CBC, and report their findings and recommendation to the Senate within 30 days. Now the floor is open. Honorable Senators, I know all of you, save for Senator Matinga, contributed to this motion. So I will allow Senator Matinga to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to also contribute to this motion. I would want to start it off, Mr. Speaker, sir, by thanking the senators for listening to the occasion and debating on this matter of national interest in a way that shows that we are Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, sir, I was away for a couple of days in Luanda as an observer of the ongoing elections that were conducted in Luanda. What impressed me, Mr. Speaker, sir, about the Luandese people, as we were going on our duty and we were asking people of Rwanda who they are going to elect, the question of which community do you come from, they answered it with the answer, that was an ancient approach. Mr. Speaker, sir, how I wish that this country of ours would look at tribalism as an ancient approach that has nowhere in the history of this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, on the onset, let me start by passing my condolences to everybody who lost life in the demonstrations, and also my sympathy to those whose property were damaged by some of the people who are taking part or who took advantage of the demonstrations to destroy people's property. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want today to speak as a father, as a head of a family, and most importantly, as a father who have two Genzs in the house. I would want to apologize to the Genzs in this country because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have for too long been obsessed with futuristic approach about a nation that we want to build without taking on board the considerations, the thinking, understanding of the Genzs. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is the high time that we as a country start talking to each other, listening to what we are saying, and knowing that this country, if this country goes down, it will go down with all of us. As I support this motion, Mr. Speaker, sir, and commend all the members who have filled their opinion, who have taken time to deliberate and to debate on this so that we can come with a holistic approach that will change this country for better, I would want to say that, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we also know that we have a robust constitution which anchors and which has envisaged a country that will be free for us, all of us. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is not lost to us that some people have taken advantage of that. Corruption has eaten into the very future that we've been talking about. We know, especially in the county government, Mr. Speaker, sir, and also in the national government, that the procurement procedures, which had envisaged 30% of the opportunities to be given to young people, people living with disability, and to women, that has gone unnoticed because people have taken advantage. Mr. Speaker, sir, in 1954, Kenya established ICDC, which had foreseen a situation whereby young people who come with ideas, they would get finance, they would get incubated, and most important, Mr. Speaker, sir, they would get experts who would guide them in their way of investment. Mr. Speaker, sir, due to corruption, ICDC now has become a pale shadow of itself. This, Mr. Speaker, has denied our youth the opportunity to get engaged in the business opportunities that come with the government, because the demands and the requirements of the procurement rules are crafted in such a way that a young person is not able to access loans or facilities in the bank because of the collaterals that they demand. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is very interesting and indeed very promising to see that the equal opportunities for all Kenyans is now being spoken about again. However, Mr. Speaker, sir, as we are doing this, we must take up the challenge when we are procuring to ensure that we put the right infrastructure in place so that even the young generation can be able to engage in the business with the county governments and the national government. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, cannot be achieved in the banking rules and the regulation that we have in this country, whereby for you to be able to access collateral, to access our credit facility, you need a collateral in form of movable, immovable assets. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that the issue of land in Kenya remains as emotive as it was 60 years ago. We know that it is still the grandparents and the parents who own these pieces of land, and they will not be willing to give the title deeds to their children to secure the collateral loans that they will need. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we must, as we are looking at these equal opportunities, as we are implementing that, we must still look at the requirements so that now even the younger generation can be able to access those opportunities without requiring them to the performance board to give bank guarantees which they cannot access because they do not have even bank accounts. Mr. Speaker, sir, today is a day that we would want to say that the demonstrations that have been going on, mainly triggered by the finance bill, have shown us that the problem we have in this country was greater than the finance bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know some people have not shied off from using tribalistic approach to settle political scores. We know, Mr. Speaker, sir, some people, most of them politicians, have used this as opportunity so that they can push their own agenda. It is, and we must, Mr. Speaker, sir, and even learning from countries like Rwanda, we must move away from tribalistic approach of looking at things, regional approach, Mr. Speaker, and knowing that if this country goes down, it goes down for every one of us. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have freedom of media. We have freedom of information. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have seen in many countries, before you get to report something, you look at, is it necessary? Is it even true? And if it is true, what is the source of information? Mr. Speaker, sir, some of the media houses in this country have not shied away from airing information that they know is not founded. And I want to quote the words of George Bush when Americans were hit by the terrorists. He told CNN, if America goes down, CNN will go down with it. I want also to tell the media houses, if Kenya goes down, even the media houses will go down with it. It is therefore imperative, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we become nationalistic enough, that we become patriotic in our country. Mr. Speaker, sir, for us all, and especially as a political class, we saw during that day when the parliament was invaded, when we all went to the Bunge Towers, we were all shaken, we were all scared, and at that particular moment, we all feared for our life, Mr. Speaker. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important that when we are talking about issues of national interest, we ask ourselves, where are we going to leave this country? Mr. Speaker, sir, I would want to say that it is important also to thank the President for having refused to sign the finance bill, but most important, Mr. Speaker, sir, for asking ourselves, where did the lane start beating us? Mr. Speaker, sir, some of the things that we've done, including overborrowing, overcommitting the country, we know that the balance sheet of this country cannot accommodate any more loans. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is imperative that we look at things that we must do to ensure that this country moves closer to having a balanced budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, I know that most of us, especially the political class, will not shy away from saying things that they think are populist without minding whether they they are true. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would want to urge and challenge every one of us, Mr. Speaker, as I support the motion, that before we make any utterances, we must ask ourselves, is it true? Where is it going to leave us as a country? How does it help us? Mr. Speaker, sir, some countries like the Arab Emirates, they have a tendency that they do not report. The high time that we know this country government is done in such sit down, because I do not want to. We must conduct a forensic audit of how everybody has gotten their money and how people have been able to finance their lifestyle, so that we can bring that money back to the people. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is one of the countries where most readers, they have foreign accounts with a lot of money that nobody can explain where the money came from. It is a high time, Mr. Speaker, sir, we start the conversation of repatriating the money that is stored in the foreign accounts back into the country. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we do not do this, how then do we require Kenyans to pay for loans that were acquired, deposited in the foreign countries, and never helped Kenyans? Mr. Speaker, sir, I support and I urge all the members, it's the high time we rise to this occasion and use this opportunity to demand repatriation of all the monies that have been deposited in foreign accounts. Mr. Speaker, sir, I support.
Now, honorable senators, Senator Matinga was the only senator who had not spoken to this motion. Having given him the opportunity to do so, I will now proceed to put the question so that we lay this matter to rest. Senator Legwe, take your seat. Sorry, the mover, before I put the question, I can see the mover is quite alert. May the mover proceed to reply.
We'll split into two. So we had agreed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was a bit worried, and I was wondering if the procedures had changed. That's why I was up in arms, but I'm glad you have granted this opportunity. For the record, Mr. Speaker, I know I have 30 minutes to reply, but in accordance with the prior agreement of approaching this motion in a bipartisan manner, I'll use half my time, then I'll donate, with your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, the remainder of the time to the leader of the minority.
So if that's the way you want to reply,
yes, sir,
you have then to allow the minority leader to proceed, and then you being the primary mover to conclude. So Senator Mazayo, you may take your 15 minutes.
I stand guided. Thank you, sir.
Senator Mazayo, you need not take the entire 15 minutes. You can even do it in 1 minute or 2 minutes. You have maximum of 15 minutes, but you need not take the entire 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I would like to react by saying that the amendments that we have decided to put in place, Mr. Speaker, on this motion are viable and can be handled. Mr. Speaker, this goes ahead to, like in the positions of the principal secretaries, what we are saying is the the Committee for Legal and for Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights. They have done these amendments, which we believe, Mr. Speaker, will go a long way to help the vision or the vision of what the Senator would wish to achieve. Mr. Speaker, moving on to further amendments that have been of equal opportunity to all Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, we note that this has given us an opportunity that we as Kenyans live in this community as one nation, and that as we engage, it is our wish that each and every Kenyan is accorded that opportunity to do whatever they want to do, or even in terms of job opportunities, that every part of this country should be considered for equal opportunities. Mr. Speaker, Kenyans, as we know, we have had cases where a certain people who are accorded an opportunity to conduct some interviews have ended up actually taking people from their own communities, or when they have that opportunity, they have ended up basically engaging people, whether they have the qualifications or not. But we are saying equal opportunities must be accorded to all Kenyans on an equal platform, and to consider that all of us are Kenyans and would need to be supported. Mr. Speaker, on the side of the health, on the side of the health reforms, Mr. Speaker, it is important that new technology is coming into place, and it's in that regard that we believe that we need to have a lot of health sector reforms, particularly where we have not been able to help our people. These amendments will go a long way to bring in those changes that we need. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would want to say that I support this further amended motion on the current state of affairs of the nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senate Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, allow me to register my appreciation to colleague senators who've taken their time in the last 2 weeks to share their thoughts on the state of the nation. Mr. Speaker, this was a unique opportunity presented to the House to speak and speak as candidly as I could, Mr. Speaker, on the various challenges that have been brought to fore by many citizens that have spoken the last few days on the state of our nation and the need for us as a leadership to respond to all that they have been addressing themselves to. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I thank all the close to, I think, 60 senators have so far spoken to this motion and shared their thoughts and ideas on how we can progress forward as a republic, which is extremely important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd wish to perhaps set some disclaimers from the onset. Number one is that we are under no illusion that as a House we can resolve everything that we are being asked to resolve as a leadership of a country. Number two is that it is not everything that can be addressed immediately. But listening to most colleagues, Mr. Speaker, they divided their proposed solution almost into three parts. There are those that are immediate, there are those that are for the medium term, and there are those that are for the long term, Mr. Speaker, insofar as fostering a prosperous nation is concerned. And that's the nature of life. It's impossible, Mr. Speaker, to achieve change or the absolucy of, Mr. Speaker, a prosperous society in one instance. But there must be a beginning. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, that this is a good beginning. This is where we want to start, Mr. Speaker, because it begins with an appreciation that we are at fault and there are things that we need to set right. Various leaders, Mr. Speaker, have since added their voice on how the nation can walk itself out of the crisis that we find themselves in. I have, for example, seen, Mr. Speaker, and it would make sense to confess this, that when we sat as a leadership to consult on the bipartisan nature of this motion, the leadership from the minority side asked us to take the preconditions for engagement that had been listed by the leader of the Azimio coalition, Mr. Speaker, in good stride and appreciate that he means well for the nation, and he feels that taking into consideration the things that have so far now been listed as amended in the amended motion, compensation of victims, acceptance and acknowledgement that their lives have been lost unnecessarily, persecution of those that have been involved in brutality, and so on and so forth, will be a good place to start. And I want to appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that that has made its way finally into the motion. Then subsequently, there are things that we'll have to do. And let nobody be under the illusion that it will be an easy journey, Mr. Speaker. If you have been involved in leadership, Mr. Speaker, I think, I'm not certain who spoke these words, but they said if you want to please everybody, don't get involved in leadership. Sell ice cream. That's the only job that you can do on earth and everybody will be happy with you. But so long as you're in leadership, there are certain difficult decisions that sometimes you'll have to make and not everybody will appreciate and celebrate you for. But the job has to be done. That job, Mr. Speaker, has befallen on us as 67 senators in this House, Mr. Speaker. We have a duty, and there's something that we can do, Mr. Speaker, to right the wrongs of the last 60 years in this republic. Mr. Speaker, we also appreciate and we know that on our own, first of all, being one of the unicameral units, of the bicameral units of Parliament in this House, Mr. Speaker, that we need our colleagues in the National Assembly to support us as well. Because the truth of the matter, much as when many of our colleagues were speaking, they may have cast aspersions and said certain things about the National Assembly, a legislation that has been passed by Senate alone is only good ink on paper. It cannot be law. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly remains to be an integral partner, Mr. Speaker, especially in resolving issues that we have been addressed and that we are aware that can only be solved through the legislative arm of government, Mr. Speaker. There are certain laws that we will need to change. There are things that we need to tighten, Mr. Speaker. There are laws that we need to amend. We will have to work with our colleagues from the National Assembly. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, if you follow what we have done, first of all, in the first part of the motion, Mr. Speaker, is the preconditions that I have spoken to. You know about the National Police Service acknowledging and apologizing for the deaths, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is issue of compensation for the peaceful protesters, those that were involved in the 2023 protests that were led by the Azimio coalition, and the 2024 protests, Mr. Speaker, that were led by other Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, there is need for compensation, and this is what the House is resolving this morning to call upon the national government to do. There is also the need for the National Police Service to extend amnesty, but I must be very clear about this. The amnesty is to the peaceful protesters, Mr. Speaker, not the criminals that have been breaking into people's businesses. If you've been arrested, you've been found with items that you looted out of someone's hard-earned sweat, Mr. Speaker, that's not the people that you are pleading the cause for, Mr. Speaker. We are very clear and particular that this is in regards to those that have been unlawfully detained, Mr. Speaker, or arrested and have court cases. We cannot direct the office of the Director of Public Prosecution, Mr. Speaker. That's why the language used is we are calling upon them in the spirit of, Mr. Speaker, setting a good climate for engagement as a country, Mr. Speaker, if they can consider. And we will be urging our colleagues in Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, because they are the line committee that engages that department, Mr. Speaker, to engage with them and ask them to withdraw the cases of those Kenyans that they are specific and they are particular, that their only crime and offense, Mr. Speaker, is a participated you know how police draft these charges. They cannot say you are idling and doing those things, but amongst themselves, they know the truth, Mr. Speaker, that this person was just caught at the wrong place and at the wrong time, Mr. Speaker. That's why we are sending. We have a call to IPOA, the Independent Police Oversight Authority, Mr. Speaker. This is with regards to investigations of citizens, Mr. Speaker, that have lost their lives in the course of this protest, Mr. Speaker. None other than the President has given a public commitment, Mr. Speaker, to urge that there be speedy investigations and conclusions of those cases so that Kenyans can know, Mr. Speaker, so that we are given a blow-by-blow account of Kenyan X, how they lost their life, and this is what happened, why, and so on and so forth, Mr. Speaker, so that the truth can be known with regards to these particular issues, Mr. Speaker. I mean, it's part of the de-escalation efforts, Mr. Speaker, so that citizens can feel that their colleagues who lost their life, this was not in vain, Mr. Speaker. We have further spoken, and this is later in the comments. There are police officers, Mr. Speaker, who have also lost their lives in the course of this protest. I was just informed this morning by the Senator for Nyeri that last week, during the protest in Karatina, there is a police woman, I think, who was attacked, and she later succumbed to injuries, and so many others across the country. There needs to be explanation and account of all these people, Mr. Speaker, so that the country can have closure, Mr. Speaker. Parliament, and this is extremely important, Mr. Speaker, we are being asked as Parliament to put in place guidelines on actualization of Article 37 of the Constitution with respect to how citizens can enjoy their right to picket without resulting in the loss of life or property. Mr. Speaker, how comes in other jurisdictions, other societies, people are able to picket and enjoy their right to protest, Mr. Speaker, without necessarily resulting in loss of life or property, Mr. Speaker? Is it that we cannot have peaceful protests in this country? None other than the High Court has asked Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that you need to enact legislation that gives life, Mr. Speaker, to the enjoyment of these freedoms. And it is not about curtailing the rights of anybody to protest, because that's the sense I get many times when we speak about this. It is just about the need to ensure that those who want to picket, those who want to protest, Mr. Speaker, are able to enjoy their rights unhinged, Mr. Speaker. It is also about ensuring that when we have protest, we don't have a ghost town like we had yesterday. There are other Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. We don't want to set a culture where people fight against the provisions of Article 37 because they imagine that every time somebody writes a letter and says they want to protest, it means that it interferes with their businesses, Mr. Speaker. That is our duty, and we cannot run away from that responsibility as Parliament, Mr. Speaker. We must provide the necessary legislation so that in the same way, Mr. Speaker, in other countries, for example, and this not necessarily must be the case, but I'm just citing an example, that if you go to other cities, Mr. Speaker, they have provided lanes or parks, Mr. Speaker, where people express their dissatisfaction, or ways in which this can be achieved. The truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that this needs to be done. Members of the public, for example, those that had said they wanted to occupy Parliament, and I said this in my moving notes when I was speaking to this motion, Mr. Speaker, that if we had provided this legislation, Mr. Speaker, then it would have been possible for us at that particular time to hear for them and say, Parliament is an institution of the people of Kenya. If you want to petition this institution, if you want to engage, what is the process? How do you want to do it? Do you want the speakers to come and receive you? Do you want the leadership so that you come and present your petition? I have seen, for example, Mr. Speaker, a flyer this morning where they are saying they want yesterday, on the 25th, which marks exactly 1 month, and that is tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, to come to Parliament and, I don't know, have a remembrance of the colleagues that they lost. Mr. Speaker, the challenge that we have, though, and we must be candid with ourselves, is that the form and the nature that the protests have taken, Mr. Speaker, is that they have been infiltrated by people who have ulterior motives, Mr. Speaker, and are looking for an opportunity either to loot or do this or the other. Therefore, in the absence of either a leader or a team that takes responsibility and that provides the information and says, this is what we want to do on such and such a day, sometimes either police over-prepare, overreact, and we lose it all, Mr. Speaker. It will make more sense today, Mr. Speaker, if either your office or that of the leadership was to get this request, written and said, this is what we want to do. And therefore, we all engage and say, let's be open and candid about ourselves. There is no harm, Mr. Speaker, in those people coming, laying the flowers the way they wish, and having an acknowledgement, Mr. Speaker, of what happened here on the 25th. The only challenge which I want to speak about, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that in the absence of either an organization or individuals to engage so that you appreciate and understand the form in which this has to be commemorated, so that you are able to separate those that intentionally, Mr. Speaker, want to come and do a commemoration, separate them from those that the criminals that have been taking advantage of this protest, Mr. Speaker, to harm other Kenyans, then we are in a difficult situation. And this is a challenge that we continue to face as a country. And until we're able to resolve that question, Mr. Speaker, perhaps you need to provide guidance. It is my sincere hope that even in listening to the Senate this morning as we bring closure to this motion, Mr. Speaker, the organizers will be pleased to reach out to your office and that of your counterpart, the Speaker of the National Assembly, so that we can provide guidance and open the gates of this house. Let people come in. Let them even see the damage that was done, to appreciate that it is not that Parliament did not take a hit, Mr. Speaker, that in the absence of proper guidance on how to petition Parliament, then you have the kind of damage that was done here. That, Mr. Speaker, and there's many other things that come to mind when I think about what happened on the 25th, Mr. Speaker, and the lives that were lost, including protesters and criminals as well, Mr. Speaker. It is important for the record to point out, because I know that perhaps this hasn't been spoken about in length, but amongst, for example, anyway, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to take a lot of time on that particular topic because I see the yellow light is on. Allow me just in concluding, Mr. Speaker, to speak to what is it that we are asking of each of our committees. We are asking the Committee on Budget and Finance, Mr. Speaker, and I know their colleagues, including, I think, Senator Osotsi and others that had spoken and said, why don't we allow the Office of Auditor General to carry out this audit for us? But I want to point them to Article 214 of our Constitution on public debt, Mr. Speaker. That is our primary responsibility, Mr. Speaker. It is us that does the approval, Mr. Speaker, of this public debt. And there is nothing that stops us from calling for the books and ensuring that even what is captured in the books of the Auditor General, Mr. Speaker, as well as what the Treasury submits to Parliament, are in agreement. Mr. Speaker, all we are asking our Budget and Finance Committee is, first of all, to verify and ensure that there is an accurate record of what is our debt status as a nation up to this point. Then go further, Mr. Speaker, and establish which are these organizations or countries, Mr. Speaker, in the form of sovereign debt that we owe. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, so that we know which are these countries or institutions that we owe these funds and what was achieved with those funds, Mr. Speaker. We know for a fact that in the audit report of 2015, then Auditor General Edward Ouko pointed out that there might be a possibility that some of the proceeds of the first Eurobond never made it to the country, Mr. Speaker. Those are facts which only Parliament can establish, and that's why I want to urge our Budget and Finance Committee to take that assignment seriously so that we have a complete audit. There is a very important exercise that we have asked them to do. Remember, last year, Mr. Speaker, we passed a law that by 2027, our debt to GDP ratio needs to be at 55%. We are now at 61%, Mr. Speaker. But we did not provide the roadmap of how to achieve that. I will not be surprised, Mr. Speaker, that we will gather again in this House in 2027 and realize that perhaps even that debt has grown beyond the 61%. Therefore, it is upon our colleagues who are in Budget and Finance Committee, Mr. Speaker, to tighten the noose and guard this House. And there is only one way of achieving it, Mr. Speaker. You must put a cap on the fiscal deficit that is allowed on the national budget, Mr. Speaker, year on year, from 2024 now all the way to 2027, for us to be able to achieve this 55%. It is something that you can mathematically arrive at. And therefore, our Budget and Finance Committee must lead us to amend Section 52C of the Public Finance Management Act even further, so that we set a cap limit of fiscal deficit year on year. Mr. Speaker, the reason the country is in this crisis, part and to a larger extent, is because of our debt challenges that has forced government to either borrow or eventually, Mr. Speaker, or raise taxes, Mr. Speaker, and you know where this has found us. The Standing Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, Mr. Speaker, also has some serious work to do. Number one is a repeal of the Section 2 and 12A of the National Government Administration Laws. This is with regard to Chief Administrative Secretaries as a sign of goodwill, because we have said we want to have a lean and inexpensive government, Mr. Speaker. They also need to establish the legal mechanism, Mr. Speaker, for merger of parastatals and state agencies that perform duplicate functions with a view to achieving a lean government. You know, Mr. Speaker, when the President addressed the nation about 2 weeks ago, he pointed out to the fact that about 47, I think, state agencies needs to be merged as an effort
including members of the public, and consider on the following issues. A, public debt and public finance management. The Standing Committee on Finance and Budget, 1, in consultation with the Parliamentary Budget Office, to independently audit the national debt and present the actual status to Parliament. 2, engages the National Treasury to submit a roadmap on its strategy to reduce the public debt to not more than 55% of the gross domestic product, GDP, in present value terms, in compliance with Section 52C of the Public Finance Management Act. And 3, engages the National Treasury to identify and implement sustainable strategies to reduce the high cost of living. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights repeals Section 2 and 12A of the National Government Administration Laws Amendment Act that establishes chief administrative secretaries, to introduce a legislation to cap the number of principal secretaries appointed pursuant to Article 155 of the Constitution of Kenya, and establish a legal mechanism for merger of parastatals and state agencies that perform duplicate functions with a view to achieving a leaner government. B, security sector reforms. The Standing Committee on National Security, Defense and Foreign Affairs, 1, engages with the National Police Service on matters security and standard operating procedures for handling demonstrations. 2, engages the government to compensate all persons whose property, both movable and immovable, were damaged or lost due to the demonstrations. And 3, engages the National Police Service to fast-track insurance compensation to police officers who either lost their lives or suffered injuries as a result of the demonstrations. And lastly, engages with the Directorate of Criminal Investigations to have investigations undertaken to ascertain the identity of persons, organizations funding and coordinating the violence during the protests and demonstrations in the country. C, fighting corruption. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights engages the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on matters corruption and action to be taken to scale up efforts to deal with corruption, especially in county governments. Equal opportunities for all Kenyans. The Standing Committee on National Cohesion, Equal Opportunity and Regional Integration, 1, engages the Public Service Commission and the National Cohesion and Integration Commission to audit the state of employment in the public service, including county governments, and propose strategies to adhere to meritocracy, equality and equity of opportunities across the public service, as espoused in Article 232 of the Constitution on the values and principles of public service. And 2, engages the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority to audit compliance with Section 53(6) of the Public Procurement and Asset Disposals Act by all public procurement entities, with a view to establish a roadmap to ensure compliance of the said provisions of the Act. E, effective public participation and stakeholder engagement. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights, 1, puts in place mechanisms to ensure that broader concerns for citizens, especially the youth, are received, considered and taken into consideration in making decisions on public affairs. And 2, puts in place mechanisms that integrate new media as a medium for public participation in legislative processes. F, health sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Health, 1, expedite and facilitate public participation in the reenactment of the Social Health Insurance Act, the Digital Health Act, the Primary Health Care Act, in compliance with the judgment of the High Court, petition number E473 of 2023, and 2, engage with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and the Council of Governors with a view to standardize human resource policy for health workers across all counties. G, education sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Education to liaise with the Minister of Education and other stakeholders with a view to resolving the concerns raised regarding junior secondary school JSS education, the new funding model for university education, and the acceptability of competence-based curriculum CBC, and report their findings and recommendations to to the Senate within 30 days. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order. Yes, Senator for Nairobi, what is your clarification?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. When the mover was called to reply, there is a request that he put to you that he would like to see the transmission of this motion to the leadership of the country, that being the President and the leader of the Azimio coalition. I was hoping that in your communication you would guide on how that would happen, because I know ordinarily those motions are not transmitted to at least the leadership of Azimio. And then secondly, Honorable Speaker, I also heard him allude to a proposed celebration of the lives that we lost last month outside of Parliament. I don't know whether we can, as a House, communicate, or how we can communicate our willingness to actually participate in that memorial and to open, even if it is required that Parliament Road be opened, because I don't believe that this House and the young people who want to honor those who lost their lives here are at odds. So I was hoping also, maybe, Speaker, you can guide the House on how we can communicate to the organizers of tomorrow's memorial, whatever event it is, that we don't want any more bloodshed. Nobody else needs to die here, and this House is not at odds with anyone. And we would actually be willing, as members of Parliament, to participate in that memorial. So those are the two clarifications I wanted to seek, Honorable Chair.
On the first link of your seeking for the clarification, indeed, the communication will be done to the Office of the President of the Republic of Kenya, and also a formal communication transmitting this motion and resolutions will be done to the Azimio leadership. As for the second link, allow me to consult with our sister house, and then a formal communication will be given. Next order. Yes, Senator for Kitui.
Mr. Speaker, so that the final document that goes to the public is the correct document. Can we have that typo corrected? It has not been corrected.
Close to. In fact, when I got there,
yes, I
went slow.
Okay.
I wanted to look at you so that you may know in compliance.
The majority is circulating a document that you should delete it. He has circulated a document that does not have that.
No, the one that we've just voted on.
Thank you, Speaker.
Contains those.
That correction. Thank you, the Speaker.
Thank you. Next order, Clerk.
Order number 9, motion, report of the Standing Committee on Health on the inquiry into the alleged irregularities in the procurement of long-lasting insecticide treated nets at the Kenya Medical Supplies Authority.
Senator Mungatana.
Yes, asante sana Bwana Spika. Jana tulipoanza mazungumzo ya mjadala huu, Bwana Spika, nilisema ya kwamba pesa nyingi zilifujwa kutoka kwa Global Fund kwa ajili ya neti za mosquitoes ama umbu ambazo zilipotea katika Wizara ya Afya. Bwana Spika, wakati huo tarehe 15 mwezi wa 5, mkuu wa utumishi wa umma Bwana Felix Kosgei alitoa matamshi ama statement ambayo walichukua hatua kama serikali kuu. Permanent Secretary wa upande huo wa afya wakati huo walifutwa, halmashauri ya KEMSA ilifutwa, ilivunjwa, na wafanyikazi ambao walihusika waliondolewa kutoka halmashauri ya KEMSA na wakapewa matransfer kwenda sehemu zingine.
I will need a request that you stop crowding and also starting between me and the senator contributing.
So Bwana Speaker, ukiangalia hiyo kazi ambayo ilifanyika ilikuwa ni miezi 9 baada ya uchaguzi wa serikali ya Rais William Ruto. Yaani kulikuwa msisimuko bado, kulikuwa hali joto ya kwamba watu wanataka kufanya kazi, kulikuwa na mwito ya kwamba wafanyikazi wa serikali wafanye kazi yao, tena waifanye kwa haki. Bwana Spika, haya yananikumbusha wakati serikali ya Rais Mwai Kibaki ilipochaguliwa mara ya kwanza. Wananchi walikuwa wamejitolea kabisa ya kwamba kutakuwa mageuzi na usimamizi mpya wa pesa zetu. Na Bwana Spika, nakumbuka wakati huo hata polisi wakiitisha hongo barabarani, wananchi watukufu walikuwa wanashuka wanakwenda wanamwambia polisi, hatutaki uchukue hongo kutoka kwa basi letu, waachilia basi letu, liko na makosa gani? Na wananchi walikuwa wamepata mgeuko mkubwa, msisimko mkubwa wakati huo tulipoingia serikalini mara ya kwanza ya muhula wa Rais Kibaki. Sasa huu muhula wa William Ruto, miezi hii 9, serikali bado ilikuwa na ule moto wa kugeuza maneno. Lakini juzi, Bwana Spika, miaka 2 baada ya sisi kuwa katika mamlaka, vijana wametokea nje barabarani na wamesema ya kwamba kuna ubadhilivu wa pesa, kuna utumizi mbaya wa pesa, kuna hali mbaya ya usimamizi wa pesa. Yaani kwa ufupi, lile joto ambalo tulikuwa nalo, ule mwito wa kufanya mageuzi, kusimamia mambo yetu sawa sawa na kutoa ubadhilifu wa pesa katika mifuko ya umma, Bwana Spika, tulikuwa tumeanza kuusahau. Kwa hivyo maombi yangu, Bwana Spika, ripoti hii imefuata action ambayo ilikuwa imechukuliwa na mkuu wa utumishi wa umma, na wajumbe wa Senate walikaa wakajadili na akaweka recommendation mpya kuhakikisha kwamba ile kazi ambayo ilikuwa imefanywa na mkuu wa utumishi wa umma iendelee zaidi, na hawa watu ambao walikuwa wamehusika na ubadhilifu wa pesa kule wapatiwe necessary punishment, Bwana Spika. Sasa mimi nasema hivi, Bwana Spika, nikiwa naunga mkono hii ripoti ya kwamba tumepewa kukumbushwa kama serikali ya kwamba wananchi watukufu wanataka usimamizi mzuri wa pesa za umma. Na sisi tusichukulie kwamba kuna mabaya mengine yalifanyika, lakini kuna point muhimu ambayo imewekwa katika maandamano haya vijana ambayo yalifanyika, kwamba tunataka kuona usimamizi mzuri wa fedha zetu. Bwana Spika, uzuri wa haya maandamano hayakusimama hapa. Walishuka katika kaunti zetu, wakaenda kwa magavana, na wanasema tunataka usimamizi mzuri wa fedha zetu hata katika sehemu za gatuzi za nchi yetu. Bwana Spika, mimi naunga mkono ripoti hii kwa sababu ripoti hii imetia nguvu kazi ambayo serikali ilikuwa imeanza nayo, mwito ambao ulikuwa umeanza nayo, na ni kwamba wale ambao wamepewa nafasi za umma kusaidia wananchi kufanya kazi katika ofisi za serikali, tafadhali mufanye kazi hizo mkijua wananchi wanaoangalia. Na sasa sisi ambao tuko kwa siasa na hatuko kwa upande wa usimamizi wa umma, tunasema pia tumepata mwamko mpya. Kwa hivyo tunataka kuona mabadiliko. kila permanent secretary, principal secretary ambaye yuko kwa nafasi sahihi, tafadhalini muhakikishe pesa zetu zinatumika sawa sawa. Treasury, tafadhalini muhakikishe pesa zetu zinatumika sawa sawa. Magavana, tafadhalini muhakikishe pesa zetu zinatumika sawa sawa. Magavana wengine, Bwana Spika, hata siku moja hawawezi kusimama mbele ya wananchi wawaambie kwamba mwaka huu tumepata pesa fulani baada ya Senate kupitisha, na sasa tumetumia pesa mpaka saa hii tumetumia pesa fulani. Na mimi sisemi kwa ubaya, lakini ukiangalia haswa gatuzi letu la Tana River, huwezi kusikia kwamba governor anasimama anasema katika projekti hii pesa tuliopata, mgao wa pesa uliokuja ni huu, pesa ambazo zimetumika ni hivi, na vile ambavyo tunatarajia kumaliza projekti hii tutatumia pesa namna hii. Bwana Spika, uwepo wa uwazi ni kitu muhimu sana katika usimamizi wa pesa za umma. Tunataka a new culture, yani tabia mpya iwe kwa hawa magavana. Bwana, kila gavana, Bwana Spika, wakiwa wanatoa statement yao, speech zao, hotuba zao katika mikutano, wao wanaelezea tumejenga barabara kilomita ngapi, tumeandika watu wangapi, tumelipa mishahara vipi, na kama kuna shida kutoka serikali kuu hatujapata pesa, pia waelezee wananchi. Uwazi katika usimamizi wa pesa za wananchi ndio hawa vijana wanataka. Na ripoti hii, Bwana Spika, inatukumbusha kwamba Senate kupitia kamati ya afya wanasisitiza ya kwamba pesa za wananchi pale KEMSA na katika vituo vyote vya serikali zitumike vizuri. Na Bwana Spika, pesa hizi si zetu, ni pesa za hawa wananchi, na ni haki kabisa kuwaelezea kila siku. Kama wewe ni governor, Bwana Spika, na unaenda pale hospitali na pesa za kusimamisha good services katika hiyo hospitali umepata nusu, umepata robo ama hujapata, eleza wananchi. Kama unaenda kwa barabara ambayo ina mashimo, eleza wananchi shida iko wapi. Kama ni mahali bridge haijajengwa, eleza wananchi shida iko wapi. Kama ni mambo ya agriculture, mashamba hujafanya, eleza wananchi ni kwa nini. Wananchi wanataka kuona pesa zao zinafanya kazi vile ambavyo ulipigania hicho kiti, ukaingia ukasimama pale na ukasema utaunda serikali, utawasaidia wale wananchi. Magavana, tafadhali mueleze wananchi wenu vile hii pesa inatumika. Mara nyingi magavana siku nyingi wakisimama wanaongea siasa. Siasa wachieni senator, wachieni mama county, wachieni wajumbe. Nyinyi kama executive mimi ni tofauti. Usiwe mtu wa kuongea siasa tangu asubuhi mpaka jioni, lakini husemi ni pesa ngapi ambayo imekuja kwako, ni pesa ngapi ambao umetumia, na ni watu wangapi ambao kama wameharibu kazi umewafuta. Haya maneno wananchi wanataka kusikia kutoka kwa governor. Speech ya governor, Bwana Spika, lazima iwe tofauti na speech ya senator. Lazima iwe tofauti na speech ya wabunge, kwa sababu wale wanaweza kuongea mambo mengine general, lakini wewe ni lazima ukielezea wananchi, kwa sababu wewe ndio chief executive officer wa pale county. Na tunaomba sana a new thinking, a new way ya kufanya kazi katika hawa magavana iingie kwa sababu ya huu mwamko mpya. Na ripoti hii inashindikiza ya kwamba ubadhilifu wa pesa sasa tunataka yawe ni mambo ya zamani, tuwe tunatumia hela zetu vizuri. Kwa hayo mengi, Bwana Spika, nataka kumshukuru chairman wa kamati ya health Bwana Mandago na timu yake yote, wamefanya kazi nzuri. Hii ripoti tunaiunga mkono. Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa nafasi hii ya kuongea. Asante sana.
Asante sana Senator wa Tana River. Sasa tunaenda kwa Senator wa Makueni, Senator Manzo Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to contribute to this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, this was about supply of treated mosquito nets to Kenyatta National Hospital by KEMSA, and then there is the involvement of the Ministry of Health, the Global Fund, and the Treasury. Mr. Speaker, what happened, according to the report then, the tender which was awarded was cancelled, and Mr. Speaker, you know, malaria, HIV, among tuberculosis and such diseases are such deadly, and these are the diseases KEMSA is aided by grants from the Global Fund to make sure that people are safe and that people don't die unnecessarily out of malaria. Mr. Speaker, when the Global Fund saw that there was a delay out of a cancelled tender and procedurally, simply because of our political interest, Mr. Speaker, then they knew the patients of malaria or the spread of malaria was likely to be heightened. And Mr. Speaker, you are aware that in a hospital as huge as KNH, Kenyatta National Hospital, or any other big hospital, there is a possibility of if the mosquito nets are not available, or mosquitoes attacking the patients and even malaria disease spreading there. So that, Mr. Speaker, somebody who had gone to hospital without malaria, or somebody who had gone to be cured something else, ends coming out of hospital even more sick or fails now to be treated at home, Mr. Speaker. And therefore the matter was very important to the public, and the Global Fund, the step it took was now to procure these nets and then give them to KEMSA to supply, of course, with money, with facilitation to do so. And therefore KEMSA, which is a broker, a government broker for purchasing of drugs, failed to make profits, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, it brought issues as to our own act of procurement at the disposal, and the committee has come up with several recommendations, including amendments of this particular act. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, what we are looking at is integrity, Mr. Speaker. And integrity has really gone a long way to bring a lot of problems in this country. When there is no integrity, then the public lose trust with the government or with the government officers who are doing so. And Mr. Speaker, when you expect these particular people who have no integrity to be prosecuted, then the institutions are supposed to investigate and eventually prosecute, Mr. Speaker, can only do so with sufficient evidence, Mr. Speaker. The moment there is no evidence, or the evidence is there but it is not being produced, then these institutions, they stall in their duties and they become ineffective, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, one of the ways of making sure corruption is curbed is by prosecuting those suspected to have committed corruption. But, Mr. Speaker, this is the biggest headache for the office of DPP. Mr. Speaker, there are two investigating agencies, and that's why they keep on sending files back to these investigators to cover certain areas to make sure that any prosecution going on is solid. You are not just going to present a sham in court, knowing very well people suspected with corruption are going to be acquitted, Mr. Speaker. So what happened in this case, and why recommendations were made, Mr. Speaker, was to make sure that, important things like treated mosquito nets, to make sure that malaria does not kill people. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, malaria is one of the biggest killers, disease in the world. It's so serious if it is not well prevented, Mr. Speaker. Many people who get attacked by malaria take such a hard time, to recover. And without proper drugs and without proper prevention, Mr. Speaker, you put human life into danger. And it is this sort of scenario, weak laws or failure to apply law, weak institutions, interfered institutions, has caused a lot of frustrations to institutions themselves, to the prosecuting agencies, and eventually to Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. And has been part of the reason there has been a lot of impatience and people almost taking the law into their own hands or ending up in demonstrations and in scenarios like that. So, Mr. Speaker, the whole idea of the recommendation by Senate is to strengthen institutions through legal amendments and also by hiring people with integrity to make sure that when they implement their duty, even when the law has issues, they implement precisely. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the impact or import of cancelling a tender of this nature, it means there is likelihood of patients being in hospital without proper nets. And therefore, the funding agency decides the reason we are funding this particular prevention of a disease is to save lives. And therefore, it takes measures to intervene. And it decides to ignore the government institution, decides to ignore Ministry of Health, Treasury, KEMSA, goes on to the portal, to their own portal, procures and makes sure these nets are available, gives them to KEMSA and tell them, please rush them to Kenyatta Hospital to make sure that no one contracts malaria. And this has happened and repetitively into many other scenarios in the country where procurement, although we have a law, is weakened, by individuals without integrity in government offices. People we have given a job to take care of our resources, people we have given a job to take care of lives of Kenyans, who end up politicizing the whole issue and making sure that nothing happens eventually. For that matter, Mr. Speaker, we want to support the recommendations by this House. Mr. Speaker, this House has done its level best in every aspect to make sure that devolution works, that the devolved functions like health, Mr. Speaker, work, and that people are accountable. And accountability, Mr. Speaker, has been a big failure in our times. And that's why you are finding there's an expectation from the youths of this country, from citizens of Kenya, that there should be accountability with the people we put into office, with the people who have been employed. Mr. Speaker, recently, KEMSA, one of the recommendations which came in this was that whoever is the CEO of an institution must not act for too long, and that wherever there is a vacant, because when you have an active CEO, Mr. Speaker, they have, they don't have full responsibility on what they are supposed to do, and they may not fully account. And therefore, one of the recommendations which Senate made was no one should act for too long. Mr. Speaker, in this country, we have history of people acting for 2 years. In fact, we had one case where somebody acted for 7 years. Mr. Speaker, you act beyond your contract. It is renewed and you are still acting. So one of the recommendations is that people should, the longest they should ever act is between 1 month and 6 months. This recommendation senators come with, so that the necessary is done. Somebody may resign from office or may pass on in office, or their contract should come to an end. Then the public service should make sure that interviews are done and somebody of integrity is picked to deal with an institution like that. Recently, KEMSA interviews were done. And the person who led in those interviews, Dr. Mulwa, was not appointed, Mr. Speaker, contrary to the expectation of many people who thought he was doing a good job while acting as a CEO of KEMSA. He's a qualified doctor, was one time a CEO of Makueni, and was now working with the Ministry of Health when he was asked to act and was doing his level best to streamline KEMSA. Now he has not been appointed, Mr. Speaker. There were all manner of rumors why you are number one and you are not picked. In fact, you should be given justification why you have not been picked, yet you are the one who has won the interview and you are the most qualified. Why will somebody else who is less qualified be picked instead of you? Of course, Mr. Speaker, politics come to play, negotiations and many other things, of course, regional balancing, which didn't apply in this case of KEMSA. And unfortunately, Dr. Mulwa has lost this particular opportunity to serve Kenyans. We still wish he will continue to apply into many other departments in health where he specializes and could serve Kenyans. But this was one of the big issues in KEMSA, the procurement of the nets. We had big problems, Mr. Speaker, when it came to the COVID times, procurement of masks and all those things, Mr. Speaker, procurement of drugs in the country. Mr. Speaker, right now, many counties don't have drugs, partly because they don't have the monies are not available in the counties, and now it's quite some number of months. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, Senate is about devolution. I don't know what we are going to do in future to make sure that counties receive their money on time. Because if they don't, they have to pay salaries, they have to pay penalty bills, when there are delays, then it becomes more expensive to run the county and to achieve less, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to support the committee on its work and its recommendations. And say there were recommendations to the Cabinet Secretary of ICT to make sure that everything flows smoothly. There were recommendations to the Board of KEMSA. There were recommendations to the Cabinet Secretary in terms of National Treasury. There were recommendations, Mr. Speaker, dealing with the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, who was to review, the structure of making sure that the intergovernmental relations flow quickly. Because you can see you have several ministries involved in one procurement, Mr. Speaker, and that could delay a lot of things. And then the Cabinet Secretary, Minister of Health, all this done, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we just don't debate here, make reports, and the recommendations are not implemented. I'm really looking forward to the implementation of this to make sure that procurement for health facilities, for medicine to the counties, procurement for mosquito nets and anything else related to health, Mr. Speaker, which is devolved, is done and serves the nation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
You are done? On my screen, I have 3 senators, Senator Ososi, Senator Onyonka, Richard, Senator Sifuna, Edwin, and I don't think any of them is around. Therefore, having no other senator interested to contribute to this motion, then I call upon the mover to reply. The mover, Senator Mariam. Are you ready to contribute, Senator Olekina? Or to reply? No, but she was the mover. I think she moved. What? Senator Mariam, why don't you request the Senator Olekina to reply? Because that's be on answer, and because you moved the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for your request, I wanted Senator Olekina to reply.
Thank you, Senator Olekina. Redama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I reply, let me thank all the members of the Senate who contributed to this motion. This is a very, very important motion that deals with matters due diligence, that deals with matters of fiduciary responsibility. And it is imperative, Mr. Speaker, that the recommendations that have been proposed by the committee which I sit on are adhered to. Mr. Speaker, when you find that there's a big lacuna in the law on matters to do with funds that are given to the country by donors, and where the Ministry of Finance receive the funds, and from the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Finance has another entity which is a procuring entity for the Ministry of Health, it becomes very problematic. The committee, and I am very happy that all the members who contributed to this motion observed keenly, noted that when it comes to the issues of specifications, when it comes to the issues of these mosquitoes nets,
There are those requirements that are required by the Ministry of Health, and there are those that are required by the donor agency so that they can be able to meet their own specifications. These are things that must be put in line, and the role of the Ministry of Health must be very, very clear. The biggest confusion that we noted when we were dealing with this matter is that just overnight, the minister writes a letter when the procurement process is coming to an end and says, halt the procurement process because you did not include certain specifications. And truth be told, Mr. Speaker, what we observe is that there was an interest by very strong people in this country, one who is on the right, the other one who is on the left, wanting to make sure that their companies are the ones that are awarded these contracts. And which led, Mr. Speaker, to KEMSA losing a lot of money. So it is important that the law is amended, the Public Procurement Asset Disposable Act is amended, and the recommendation by the committee is actually effected, so that it becomes very clear. We don't want to be losing money every single time, Mr. Speaker. When you have an agency that has been given money to be able to procure certain services, in this case now, like now the mosquito nets, and that agency is supposed to make some money out of it, a commission, but it ends up losing because the agency that has given this money as a grant has set very stringent measures, and for them to be able to qualify, they have to follow directly. And if they fail, then in this case, that agency ends up just carrying out its own direct procurement. So it is imperative. So I thank all the members, and I hope that this would be one of those motions or other reports that would be taken seriously, and the ministry and this Senate, and particularly the committee that I sit in, brings in the recommendations, the amendments, so that whatever has been agreed on can be able to be implemented. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to reply.
Okay, thank you, Senator Orekina. Therefore, I was trying to assert in the quorum to put the question, but since we have no requisite quorum, it's still, it's now in our standing orders that we should always ascertain whether you have quorum before.
So, Mr. Speaker, as I beg to reply, may I request that the question be put another time because of quorum?
Well, very well. That's okay. So the question will be put, we defer the putting of the question, maybe to the next sitting or some other time. Next order.
Order number 10, motion, report of the Standing Committee on Land, Environment and Natural Resources on a petition to the Senate by residents of Siany area, Nyamira County, regarding destruction of 41 hectares of Siany wetland in LR number North Mugirango, Magwagwa 403.
Chairperson, Standing Committee on Land, Environment and Natural Resources. Is he present? We defer that order. Next order.
Order number 11, motion, report of the Select Committee on County Public Investments and Special Funds on its consideration of the audit reports of the water service providers for the year ended 30th June 2019, 30th June 2020, and 30th June 2021.
Chairperson, Committee on County Public Investments and Special Funds. Okay, next order. That order is defunct.
Order number 12, motion, report of the Select Committee on county public accounts on its consideration of the reports of the Auditor General on the financial statements of Tharaka Nithi, Homa Bay, Kakamega, Kirinyaga, Makueni, Meru, Bomet, Muranga, Nandi, Nyamira, Nyeri, Siaya, Vihiga, Wajir, and Samburu County Executives for the financial year 2019-2020.
Chairperson, County Public Accounts Committee, not in, so the motion is defunct.
Order number 13, reports of the Select Committee on...
Clerk, approach the chair for short.
Special funds on its consideration of the audit reports of various water service companies for the financial years 2018-2019, 2019-2020, and 2020-2021.
The Chairperson, Committee on County Public Investments and Special Funds. The motion is defunct.
Order number 14, motion, report of the 66th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference held in Accra, Ghana from 30th September to 6th October 2023.
Okay, we have Senator Professor Margaret Kamar. I move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to move the motion that the Senate notes the report of the 66th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference held in Accra, Ghana from the 30th September to 30th October 2023, laid on the table, to the 6th of October 2023, laid on the table of the Senate on Wednesday, 14th February 2024. Mr. Speaker, sir, the 66th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference took place from the 30th of September to the 6th of October 2023